Hi everyone, I've got another gouache tutorial for you guys today. I'll be using the gouache and all of the other materials will be listed down below as well. This is a shorter version of the full-length real-time tutorial available over on my Patreon, which also goes through the sketching process. The full length is just over an hour long, so if you'd like to sketch and paint along with me, then feel free to check out the tutorial over there. I also have many other real-time tutorials available over on there, and here's a sneak peek at some of the tutorials that are coming out in April. When you join as a member, you get instant access to all of the previous month's tutorials as well, and by the end of this month there will be about 22 tutorials on there, so there'll be plenty for you to follow along and practice with. I'll have a link down below where you can check out my Patreon and also browse the available tutorials there. Alright, we can get started with the painting, so just soaking my brush through, and I'm gonna start with the sky. So I'm going to work from top to bottom and work from the background to the foreground. So for the sky, I want some ultramarine blue and some white. So I'm just going to use a little bit of blue, maybe a bit more, and maybe just a little bit of burnt umber to tone down the blue a little. So I'm adding a touch of burnt umber into it. And that's the blue I'm going for. I just need to mix up some more. So I'm just adding some more ultramarine blue and a touch of burnt umber. And I'm just mixing up some more paint, so that way I don't get any streakiness when I blend. I'm adding in a little bit of white to it as I move down. And for the blue below that, I want to use a cooler blue. So I want to use the cool blue in the set. I want to make it a little bit lighter, and I'm leaving a little gap for that pink cloud, just so it makes it easier for me to lay on a bit more of a pure color. And then it's going to blend into pink. So I'm going to clean off my brush. So I've just noticed my sky looks a little bit streaky, so I'm just going to mix up some more paint and just block it in a little bit more. And I'm going to mix up the pink now, so it's quite a peachy color. I'll use a little bit of that pinkish rose color, and I'll mix it with some of the warm yellow. And then towards the top, I think it's a little bit more pink, so I'm going to mix in more of the pink into there. And I'm going to start to bring it up to here. And then I'm just going to clean this off. And just try to blend out the two colors on the paper. I might have to pick up some more paint, just so I have something to work with. I just want a simple blend, just so there's no harsh lines there. And using this very pale color, I'm also going to just go through this part that we left out before. So I'm going to go through and paint in that pink streak of cloud, and I'm using a lot of white in the mixture and just roughly and loosely going through, trying to use a lot of paint and water so that way it doesn't muddy too easily on the paper. So I want to make it a little bit streaky, like it's a wisp of cloud floating through. And because the water is a reflection of the sky, while you have this paint here, you can start placing it into the water here, so you can just mix up some more. I'm using my round brush now. This is the Princeton Neptune round brush. This one is one that I've used a lot for doing stippling and things like that. So the tip of it isn't so sharp anymore because I've made it a bit blunt, but I want to use the same technique later in this painting, so I'm going to use this brush. And now I'm going to start with the distant mountains and paint them in. So once the sky here has dried, you can paint in the mountains. So as you'll see in the reference photo, those distant mountains are just a very pale blue. So I'm just going to use ultramarine blue and some burnt umber. I might just mix in a bit of that cool blue as well, make it a little bit lighter. So that's the first layer. Now you want to wait for this to dry before you paint on the second layer of mountains, because you don't want the paint to start to muddy. While I'm waiting for it to dry, I'm just going to start mixing up the color for the second mountain. So it's going to be a bit darker. I might add some more ultramarine blue and a little bit of yellow to it actually. So I'm adding some cool yellow to push it a little bit towards green. And I'm going to add quite a bit of burnt umber to make this darker. So I'm just testing out the color while I wait for the previous layer to dry. And you can make the edges of this one a little bit more textured and jagged to help suggest the trees that are growing on this little island. And then just going to use the tip of my brush just to nudge the edges a little, just to give it a little bit of texture. And for the one on the left, I'll add in a little bit more white to it, and it also sits just a little below the horizon line. And while I wait for this to dry, I'm going to mix up the color for the mountains that are very close to us. So I'm going to pick up some of the Prussian blue and some black and mix a very dark blue. And I'm going to add some white into it just to make it a bit lighter. And you can also now just block it in. So right now that block of shape looks a little bit uninteresting, so let's bring out a bit more of the textures on there. You can just nudge around on the edge of the island. Let's quickly block in the one over here as well. Then for the textures, you can use a trick where you just pick up some paint and then pinch the base of the hairs so you get the hairs to spread out, and then you can just stipple along here so you get the texture of foliage. And you can play around a little bit to see what shape works best. And you can do the same over here as well. So just stipple along the edge some of the texture of foliage. And there's also some textures on the mountain that I want to paint in. So I just mix some burnt umber and some white into this dark blue mixture already, and I'm just using a dry brush texture to scrub on a little bit of the texture. So dry brush meaning there's a lot of thick paint on this brush and not as much water, so I'm getting some of the textures of the brush coming through. Then I'm going to try and do that with this one here as well. So just a little bit of some textures that you might be able to see. I'm adding in a bit more burnt umber. These ones here, you don't have to add too much detail to them, so that way it appears as though they're further away. And I'm going to mix up some more black and Prussian blue. And this time I'm going to make it a little bit darker than the base color for this. And that's because I want to use it as a bit of a shadow color behind some of the green foliage you can see. So you can take a little bit of trial and error to get this right. You don't want to do this with a brush that's very precious to you. And I'm just going to stipple like this. So I'm going to stipple where I can see the clusters of the foliage on the island. And I now want to mix up some green, so you can just use some of the yellow. So I'm going to use some cool yellow, and you can actually just mix it with the existing mixture here, so the black and Prussian blue mixture. So once you've got that paint, you can do the same thing where you just pinch the base. If you're finding it difficult to split the hairs apart, try to take off some of the moisture in the brush, because moisture is what makes the hairs clump together. So you just want to stipple on top of where you laid in those dark shadows. I think I'm just going to add a little bit more yellow to mine. So I'm stippling right on top of where I laid in those clusters of darks. And I'm going to repeat this on this right side here. Then I'm going to start adding more yellow into this green to highlight it, and maybe a little bit of white. So I'm going to make it lighter, and we're just going to highlight some of the edges where it's just receiving maybe a little bit more light. So I'm going to go a little bit more towards the edge and towards the top of these clusters. And then we can start working on the reflection, which is actually fairly easy. We can paint it in using just a lot of horizontal strokes. I'm first going to paint in those blue patches I can see. So I'm going to give this a thorough clean to get out all that color from before. Then pick up some white and mix it with some cool blue. Maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue. Bit more white, a touch of burnt umber to tone it down slightly, and this sits below the island, so we can just sweep that in here. Then let's start with the reflection of this island here. So you can just mix up some more of that color. So I'm just using black and Prussian blue again and adding a little bit of white to it. And I'm going to make this base a little bit darker actually. And at the same time you can apply it in here, as this is the color that reflects into the water. But I'm not going to bring it all the way out. I'm going to bring it up to about here, and then I'm going to use horizontal strokes to bring it out further. I'm switching to my liner brush to do these thin horizontal strokes. You could also use a round brush that comes to a pointy tip, whichever is easier. And then using the paint we mixed up, you're going to start to pull out these strokes horizontally. So just using lots of quick horizontal strokes. Make sure the paint is runny enough so you can pull it out easily. I'm trying to keep these strokes nice and thin so it looks a little bit more convincing. And while we have this paint here, we can do the same and reflect this island over here as well. Since it's the same color, I'm just adding a bit more white into it. And we're going to start reflecting it just using horizontal strokes. I'm adding a bit more white into my paint now as I'm realizing that my reflection is actually a little bit darker than the island, so I don't want it to be darker than the island, so I'm going to add in some more white to make it lighter. And then with this color on your brush, you can also place some in the center. I'm just going to add some more white to it first and maybe add a little bit more Prussian blue into it, make it a bit more blue. And you can place in some strokes in the center as well. So the waves that are closer to us down the bottom are going to be larger, and as they fade into the distance, they'll get thinner and shorter. And then with this paint on your brush, you can just make it a little bit lighter and you can just weave in some more strokes. I'm just going to keep building up these strokes until I've covered everything and it looks like this whole part is just water rippling. And I'm also going to build them into here so they can extend all the way across. And you can also go back into the pink and layer some of that on top. So if you want to push back some of the reflections, maybe you feel like you brought this out a bit too far, you can go back into the pink mixture or the pinkish orange mixture. And you can use this to push this back a little. You can also just thread some through so the edge of the reflection looks more natural. I want some more smaller strokes running through here, I think. There's a little bit of a disconnect. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and again, if you would like more real-time tutorials to paint along with, I upload 4 to 5 new ones every month on Patreon, so I'll have a link for that down below. Hopefully I will see you on there as well. Thank you guys for watching this one, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.